I was really just going to put a video and talk. I got my glasses off so I can't see comments. Don't bother putting comments up. I didn't do this for an interaction. I did this really just to give my view on things. Um, just for the record, when Trump first got voted in way back, was it 2016? I didn't vote. I haven't voted for anybody since Nader. And the reason why I voted for Nader was really just philosophical reasons that he was um, he was determined to do what he said he was going to do, which is kind of rare among presidents to be as determined that. And he was so determined that whenever he had a sizable number of voters, um, everybody knew to beat Trump, they would have to, or not Trump, but George W. Bush. They had to pass. I guess it was Hillary's votes over. The votes over to Hillary, and his argument was that, well, then that would be betraying those who voted for me, and that's honest. And those some people see that as, well, we could have had somebody in power that was Democratic. The thing is that we're lacking integrity in this country, and it's because we're thinking that somehow those we vote in are like actually having an effect whenever we've got corruption in our government. And really, what the conservatives were doing to vote Trump in was that they believed that since he had money, since he was a businessman, they didn't even research it, that he would execute. He would go and clean the so called swamp, which is all the corruption that was going on in the government. And he didn't. He's trying, I guess. People are so eager to point out that he's crazy, but I think his craziness is actually a tactic, because if you let everybody know that you're crazy, it's almost like silly stories in the Bible. There are going to be arrogant people among the group that are going to come and be so eager to kick you out because they think you're crazy. And it may be the case that, whenever you come in as president, you you then have to you have to show proof that you're going to do what you're going to do. And it's almost that you have to kind of distract the people, because they're like lions. They're going to be ready to tear you apart at the sign that you're not doing what you said you're going to do, or that you're. So what he did the first time was that he created just in this impossible target to build a wall, and then he came up all these excuses for why they needed to build a wall, any of that stuff, and it was really just to distract all the conservatives so that he could do other things. And I think he made some bad decisions, still making bad decisions about deporting people. But this is execution, this is tactics. What he's doing is, there's no way you can come in on a 4-year term and make all the necessary changes to get stuff cleaned up. You have to take a drastic approach. It's almost like you've got an infection in your body, and uh, it's turning legs gangrenous. You have to make some hard decisions, things that are very destructive, like amputating limbs. You can't just go and deal with it slowly, because you risk the chance of losing more. And so that's the reason why recently, I believe, he's been going through these agencies and killing them off. He's killing them off, outright, to see what other agencies depend on that agency. because they'll start screaming and then they'll go back and they'll bring those guys back. What happens inside the agencies is that whenever they do that, they're going to have a certain number of people that are going to say, oh, well, there's the end of that. And then they're going to move someplace else. The ones that really need to be there, they're going to be the ones that are screaming. And if the agency sees needs for them whenever they bring them back, they're going to bring back fewer people, but the essential people that need to be in there. It's a tactic. And it's just like amputating an arm when you've got an infection. The stuff he's been saying about USAID, I think the reason why he brought in Elon Musk is because he could see Elon Musk would execute things. He would get things done. And if he's a psychopath, it's executing stuff like firings, because a empath, if given the same choice, might kill themselves after firing off like a people. And if you don't believe me, just go look up some of the things that happened during COVID. There was a nurse. She values the interaction as and the continual depression of people dying under her watchful eye. So the thing is, episode of This American Life called the Psychopath Test. And one of the psychopaths that they got to interview had been hired by a blender manufacturer, forgot their names, to fire off a whole bunch of people in a plant or whatever. And anyhow, um, the because it was certain that he was a psychopath, and he didn't even know he was a psychopath. And the guy that was talking to him would give him all these examples of each example. He would cut the psychopath would come up with a defense, and it was logical. He was a rare psychopath. There are not very many psychopaths that actually get educated. They would rather fake a credential than actually get educated, because they're natural managers. They uh, as growing up, the thing they fear the most is being found out, because the instant response to that is being kicked out. And it isn't to say they don't do negative, awful things, and they do them because they don't have any concern for what's right and what's wrong. There are different levels of them. The low level um, psychopath, um, and I've researched this. The low level psychopath is, and this was according to a BBC. I think it's called Real People or something like that. Um, there was a guy in there that had interviewed a high functioning psychopath, and high functioning psychopaths actually end up in organizations. And it was said that a high functioning psychopath is not somebody that's going to kill you right away. They would rather figure out some way to profit from a low functioning psychopath, or one that doesn't have um, who's tries to take the easy way out of things, and doesn't go for bigger things. Doesn't have a whole lot of ambition, or just doesn't have the smarts to actually make it high enough to hierarchies and positions in high places. In our government, if there's corruption, there's a lot of psychopaths, and who knows better if Trump's a psychopath or a sociopath or just a narcissistic guy who better to know how to deal with people that are like that are got to be all through our government. Okay. So anyhow, so the thing is that I figure I don't really work on signs, but I figure you need to give them a benefit of a doubt, even if you think they're crazy, because the media is so eager to determine that he's crazy, and people have been saying that he's crazy all along, and the conservatives won't believe it, and I guess now they're probably sorry that they put him in. I don't know. Um, some are it's mixed feelings. Keep in mind the first time around, whenever he got voted in, there was this situation called a company called Cambridge Analytica that had used information from Facebook book users to determine who the swing voters were, and then they sent right wing propaganda to the swing voters. Uh, and my theory is that, or my hypothesis is that the swing voters, if your leftist moderate friend goes extremely right, you're going to assume that all the liberals are crazy not to vote for Trump. See? And people were being manipulated on Facebook. Uh, and it really wasn't Facebook's fault, because they had told everybody that they were selling people's profiles to companies, and then I guess they got caught for it, and so they had to tell everybody to take that stuff and throw it away, boot or whatever. But Cambridge Analytica did, and they used it to get Trump further along. One of the people that was involved in this, a lady, claimed that she had been involved in doing something similar for the Obama campaign. And Cambridge Analytica was also involved with Brexit in England. So they tested it on Brexit, and then they employed it um, on Trump's campaign. Some of the other things I know about all of this is that Trump was making a lot of waves before um, before he ran for president. That Obama was not an American, that he was of Muslim descent and all that crap. And um, he was invited to a dinner that was hosted by Obama. And then Obama just basically roasted Trump and just kind of make fun of him, but in kind of a light. Um, he kind of tried to make Trump look silly by taking him taking his stuff that he was doing uh, as a on TV and whatnot as like ultimately really good example of his abilities, whenever that audience is just really that that should be held up as um, anyhow. And so you can see where I'm going with that. And there was a documentary called Choice 2016 about Hillary and Trump. And in that video, either it was in that one or it was one later, they talked to somebody who knew Trump and said that whenever Obama um, provoked him in that dinner in front of everybody, um, she said, "You don't know who you're dealing with, Obama. You just did something that was really stupid." he probably should have true stuff. Like once he had a ice rink that needed to be built, and he said he went around to all the contractors in New York and said, we need to have this built pro bono, which means for the public good. And uh, he eventually got one contractor that didn't know what pro bono meant and just kind of assumed that it meant that they would be getting paid. And at the end of it, once the ice rink was built, um, the guy came around and says, "I need to pay my guys," and Trump says, "Didn't we say this was going to be done pro bono?" And then the guy went and checked out and found out that it was really his fault because Trump was, you know, Trump knew it wouldn't get done for free, but he wanted to it, his tactic was to go around and that's perfectly legal. There's no malicious. I mean, you can't really haul somebody in for wanting a contractor to work for free, but he used a lingo that one contractor didn't know about, and that's the kind of guy that Trump is. He uh, Also in that documentary, they pointed out someone said that they asked Trump's crooked lawyer, um, the one that I think he fired somewhere in his reign. Um, that lawyer said that Trump um, doesn't actually believes some of the things he says. What he believes is isn't important. He believes that if he says something enough, people will believe it. And if you go back and you look at all the stuff that he's done, like these interviews with reporters, and have told the reporters that they're criminals coming over in Mexico, and this one reporter knew that there wasn't enough evidence of it, and pointed it out, and Trump keeps repeating, says, "You don't know that, you don't understand, and Trump keeps repeating it. That's that response. Also, in the book The Art of the Deal, Trump had a term called truthful hyperbole, which means that you tell a little lie, kind of a white lie, or you make things to pretty much make people feel a little bit better whenever they're talking in public to their friends, and kind of to save face. And one example of that was that in Trump Towers, the floors start at 10 instead of 1, because who wants to say they live on the first floor of the Trump Tower? They'd rather say that they live on the 10th floor or the 15th floor. And that's an example of the kind of tactics he takes. And if he goes over to be ambassador to some country, he'll say stupid stuff like India, or the Prime Minister of India, that he was the father of India, which was really stupid because it's been pointed out that he's been trying to push through fascist agendas and respected Hitler and the Nazis and things like that, and was pushing through all this rhetoric that highly racist rhetoric, like, you know, um, the Americans, or the white people, are like white bread that hasn't been baked well enough, and the Indians are well baked and perfect for consumption. They're like bread, perfect for consumption. And so that's just one way of just kind of building up national pride, and that's what leaders do. Putin does stuff like that. There are people who have done stuff like that, I'm sure, in America, and Trump doesn't, to kind of build up the country. It's kind of a false. truth. It's a white lie. It's neglecting information. It's half truth, um, or no truth at all. It's a form of manipulation, and it's easy for guys in power to do that sort of thing because a lot of the people that are around, like say 5% of the people in the government, are sociopaths and psychopaths. And it's hard to trust them. So I don't know what effect he's going to have. The other thing is that Lawrence Lessig has pointed out that we don't have real democracy in the country, that in order to have real democracy, we have to take care of two problems. And one of them is called Tweedism. There was a guy named Boss Tweed that said, I don't care who you vote for, just as long as I can nominate them. And that's the rich people pushing um, political campaigns through that get advertisements and stuff, and eventually you're going to be voting for their choices. The Koch brothers or Koch brothers that have industries in coal and sugar in the Everglades um, voted vote for people. I mean, they nominate, or they push people through. I don't really understand the process, but they push through people into our government to be president on both ends, on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. And these are people that are going to be more favorable to their agenda. Um, Presidents in the past, like Reagan and Bush and whatnot, would consult directly with the Koch brothers, because um, they have such a great bit of the country's wealth in their empires, and so the presidents can't really ignore them because they kind of represent a bigger citizen than the rest of us. And I understand all the dishonest things that have been done. I have some answers that the stress from having to survive on minimum wage, or on a non-living wage, um, according to Robert Sapolsky, who is a biological he's done research on stress and how it affects people, and he said that stress doesn't cause ulcers. What stress does is it suppresses the immune system, and the bacteria that's in our gut causes the ulcers. That's where the ulcers. That's how that happens. And I've told people during COVID that, as a in my position, you can go and look it up, but I've kind of feel that people will, you know, will say, "Oh, poo poo me," because, but I had a computer science degree, so it isn't like I didn't know anything. But I had derived from what Robert Sapolsky said, and during COVID, I thought, where is Robert Sapolsky to talk about stress whenever in Australia people were jumping over each other to get toilet paper? They obviously were not thinking, and it was because of stress. Because stress does a number of things, and the four that I tend to talk about is stress suppresses cognition. It makes you stupid, and an example of that is when you're in college, you you cram for an exam, and the next morning you can't remember anything. um, and that's because of stress. The stress is, um, and the body puts cognition on hold because stress is really there to keep you safe whenever a lion's chasing you. But we have the same response to lesser stressors that a zebra does to a lion, and it affects our cognition, tissue regrowth, immune system, reproduction. And so, if you want to have a baby, forget about it. If you're highly stressed, if your job is not paying you well or not, and you're struggling for survival, why bring a baby into the world? Um, the stress is going to keep you from having that baby because reproduction doesn't matter if a lion's chasing you. That all comes from the documentary National Geographic Stress Portrait of a Killer, and that's where Robert Sapolsky talks about that stuff. And Robert Sapolsky is an atheist. However, he has two children named Benjamin and Rachel, which are biblical names, so you can't really tell. Um, and he said really strange stuff, like whenever he went to Joe Rogan to talk to him and they were talking about viruses, he talked about a virus like it was a living, this virus figured out how to do that. And viruses aren't living anything. They're patterns of proteins that end up in the right place and create a factory that generates organisms that go through a body and set up factories um, that generate the proteins, you know, more of the virus. And so the virus is the message. It just happens. And then the funny, almost the same way. What you do is you load the machine with tons of malicious code, and it doesn't matter if it goes into a data bank. And there's a there are things like um, certain attacks that will actually cause the stack, which is there's a thing called a stack pointer, to go beyond the code base and go right into the data. Um, and we have this thing in computer science called, or this phrase, you process data, you execute code. You don't execute data and process code because that's what causes a computer to crash. Uh, Data shouldn't be, and it doesn't matter. The thing is in a computer, all the memory is just bytes of memory. It doesn't matter whether it's data or it's code. It's all the same. It just depends on where you start. And a code, if you start at the wrong place in the code, the the instructions mean something completely lunatic, because and there's some chance that it might execute the right code, but still it will not be the correct program. And if you start executing data, it's the same sort of effect of executing from a random place inside of a piece of code. And that stuff's all called machine code, and assembly is the um, symbolic equivalent to machine code. But I took a course in this stuff, and the difference is that the assembly makes it simpler to code um, for a computer because it takes into account all the instructions the multitude of instructions that work with different operand sizes, like 8 bits, 16 bits, 32 bits, 64 bits, when doing adds, subtracts, and all that stuff. The reason why I'm talking about this stuff as a side is really just to let people know, at least the computer types of that might be watching, that I know what I'm talking about. That I'm not just making stuff up. Um, that's one way of kind of letting people know that you're not somebody who would intentionally lie to people. I might be wrong about my stuff. I may be kind of assuming stuff. I may have gotten the wrong information from the sources. The sources may have been lying about stuff. There's any number of things that can keep you from actually being able to be truthful. Also, there are layers of miscommunication, even whenever you have the greatest intent to transfer knowledge, there's things that can get in the way, such as cultural differences, like and language differences. Like if you say something's cool in Spanish, it would mean something's cold. It wouldn't mean something is fantastic. It's because there isn't an equivalent. That a direct translation is not a solution. You need to think about what equivalents there are in the culture that represent the same concepts. And so learning a language is not enough. You have to understand the culture in order to um, into really being able to survive in that environment. And some of the ways of doing that is by moving and living there, but you're going to still say stupid stuff and people are going to laugh at you. In China, they take great, they had a comedian, and it wasn't a comedian, it was just somebody that made them laugh. And the reason why was because they get a certain amount of glee from seeing somebody trying hard to speak Cantonese and, you know, talking their language. And there's a guy going around YouTube that's speaking perfectly, and it freaks them out because they don't expect a white guy to start talking in their language. And this guy knows a lot of languages, and he's doing it all over the place. And now that's kind of the attraction to watching his show, is to see people's reactions to him talking in their language perfectly well. I'd like to see if he can do that in Navajo, because I had a friend in college that said it takes about 7 years to it takes about 7 years to learn Navajo, and even then, you're not really going to be that. You're not going to be that good in speaking Navajo. And if you want an example of Navajo, go and listen to some. It doesn't sound. It doesn't really have many consonants. It sounds like it sounds more like vowels than it sounds like consonants. And it sounds like this. It's like it's like that. When Clinton, back in the '90s, when President Clinton um, got when he was voted in, he took a trip to Los Alamos, my hometown, Los Alamos, New Mexico, and he went to Johnson Field and gave a speech. And at the time, that day, um, all the way down Diamond Drive, there were just tons and tons of cars parked on the side of the road. And that's like a 4-lane street. And in the area where you would, the margin on the side was just filled with cars parked diagonally all the way up, all the way to the lab, down Diamond Drive, all the way past the junior. Well, it didn't go to the junior high. It did go to the edge of the junior high over the bridge. And so people from Los Alamos, or people that have been to Los Alamos, can understand how much people had come to see Clinton give his talk. And the reason why he was there in the first place is because that's what John F. Kennedy did whenever he got voted in, was he went to Los Alamos and gave a talk. Um, Clinton um, was really just trying to um, fit the prophecy, um, make people, put in the symbols to make people think that he was going to be like John F. Kennedy and, stuff like that. And anyhow, the Indian nation came up um, to do their um, anthem or whatever. Their yeah, their theme or whatever. I forgot what they call it. Um, like where I'm getting at with that. And it lasted like 10, 15 minutes. And I mean, Clinton must have been wanting to go to the bathroom. In the middle of, it's kind of like, okay, this is done, and he would start walking off, and then they would continue doing this, you know, uh, this song. And Navajo music is, truthfully, Navajo music is just kind of unlistenable because it's just drums and vowels, and I mean, like, a few consonants, and it sounds like what people think Indian music should sound like. It'll go, "Oh, oh, oh," and they were doing that drumming, and he, after that whole thing, um, and we had speakers up, made it look kind of like it was Live Aid. There were so many people sitting on the football field and whatnot, and um, I had I was going to graduate in '93, and so the head of UNMLA pushed me and some other of the guys that were going to graduate up to the front. So I was within like 30 feet of Clinton. I forgot his name. I do that, um, Bill Clinton. So I was like within 30 feet of him when this was all going on, and it was crazy. This people in Los Alamos were just crazy. Because a president's coming to give a talk, and so they were playing the Fleetwood Mac's "Don't Think About Tomorrow, It'll Soon Be Here." That song on big speakers and blaring and stuff. And after Clinton gave his talk and went back to the White House, he he made a tax cut. He cut off some of the funding from the lab. I mean, he made the realization that the lab just had too much money. It made everybody think, the next time this happens, we're not going to respond like this, by making a big shindig about it. Yeah. Anyhow, that's just a story I had about. But the thing is that when Trump got pissed off about it, because I couldn't imagine conservatives vote, because the guy didn't. I mean, the guy was the perfect example of what it says in the Bible: judge a man by his fruits. If his fruits are bad, the man is bad. And I knew that he had at least 15 fruits, 15 examples of things that he'd failed at. And he had a kind of a college these college seminars that he was bringing advertisements, than actually being. It was really just his book, The Art of the Deal, being made out as these classes, and wasn't benefit opportunist. And when he was in the first time, he wouldn't let the government look at his tax records, because he knew. I guess Barbara Walters did an interview with him, and discussed the relevancy of his not of his book with him, and said you can't be a good example of somebody in business because you've got all this debt over here. And he tried to shoo her away on that, and continued to try to make it seem like he had these abilities to make these businesses work. And so I have any confidence in Trump. I still, now it's kind of like, I don't know. And I've kind of determined that it really is not important enough, because even if I vote, I'm probably not going to have as much of an effect, especially if the government's corrupt enough that the wrong people are going to get pushed through in any case. And the stress over that is going to not be to my benefit. And it'll cause me to make stupid stuff like cutting off ties to half my friends, because I did that when he was voted in the first time. I went through all my Facebook friends, and everybody that was for Trump, I unfriended them. And I would, now I'm trying to friend back some of those people, and they won't friend me back because of that, just that rough approach that I took. And my feeling now is that um, after hearing that whenever we entered Iraq, somebody said that 5% of the population of Iraq were Christians, and Saddam didn't mess with them because they were um, they were not political. And so I figure, probably the best thing, I pondered it for a long time. And then I noticed that in the Bible, where Jesus is led into the desert or the wilderness to get tempted by the devil, the last thing the devil presents, and it was, I'll give you rulership of the world, uh, and then worship me, and you worship me. And actually didn't even have to say, leave me, Satan. And that was necessary for him to agree with his thing. Now, there are people that'll say, oh, that stuff's completely silly. If you're so eager to prove that other people are silly, and you're not willing to consider the philosophy and the things that may be true in it, then you've spent you've spent any chance that anybody is going to want to listen to you um, in those areas. And you just, you forfeited, you've burnt your bridge right then and there. And that goes, I had an example of that whenever I was a part of Alt Space VR. I was a member, and there was a Muslim and a Jewish guy discussing their differences. They were discussing my differences. I mean, discovering, discussing their differences. And there was this guy who was obviously drunk, a little bit effeminate, came up and said, all this stuff you're saying is complete hogwash. And then I turned to him and I said, because I knew that the minute he said that, he just dissed those guys. And whatever it was that he thought he was going, any effect he thought he was going to have, just got, it got shot down in flames. And from that point on, he would have no effect on those guys. Because in order for somebody to really trust on what you have to say, you have to friend them. You have to be, it takes a longer amount of time. It isn't something that's just going to happen as a result of some really shallow comment. And so that's ambassadorship, you know. If you want to be an effective ambassador, you have to not be so cultural differences is a barrier to communication. Um, Present um, popular culture, you know, slang, concepts that are kind of passing fads can be a very translation in another culture. People are going to misunderstand you. Um, Even the way you say things, if you're extremely aggressive in your saying your things, if you're not like really mellow, say you're in China and you do this, the people will kill you because aggression them translates to um, it's awkward and it can get you killed because in their culture nobody talks aggressively like that. They try to maintain a positive front. But in this country, people understand the difference between being mad and just being determined, having stern. You know, there's parts in the Bible where it says they knew that they trusted that what he said um, was correct because he showed authority, and that didn't mean that it was kind of an assumption. If you have authority over a subject, if it seems like you're mostly true, then you probably pretty true. Whereas you get somebody who sounds like they're saying something foolish and doesn't have any logic in their stuff. Um, and if somebody has a problem and he comes back with some rebuke and it doesn't have any good logic to it, people are going to be less likely um, to trust what he has to say. And rebuke is, and I'm not very good with responding to people whenever I'm talking live because I got a problem called aphasia. I would have to go back and look at the comments and then kind of think really hard about something because I can't respond. I can't interact with people in real time. Aphasia is a kind of an audio dyslexia, and what I end up doing is I end up filter feeding. I get all this information, then I kind of think about it for a long time, and then I develop concepts and the things that stick. I tend to repeat a lot, um, which almost sounds like what Trump does. He tends to repeat things. You know, he thinks if he does it enough, people believe him. Um, but I don't expect people to believe me. I just, you know, if I have something to say, I'm going to say it. And if anybody says, well, nobody cares about that, or, I mean, you can't really say that because then you would have to poll people to see if they care about that. That's an assumption. It's an opinion. And some people will say, what are you on about? Which is kind of like, can I get an outline of this? I say, you're going to have to wait. You get the text, run it through Chat GPT, it will tell you what it was I was talking about. I'm not so good at working with or coming up with an outline. I kind of work in the moment, kind of like an oil painter. Acrylics painters, they work before they make the painting that their designers do this. Um, and you have to do it with acrylics because they dry so fast. They work um, ahead of the game. They make what they're going to make, and then they're left with what they've got. Oil painters aren't really all that sure of what they're going to do, and they use oils because they're always drying and they're always workable. So they can be workable for like a week or 2 weeks, It's perfect if you're juggling paintings, because the stuff is still wet. And if you're sure about what you've got and think that that's what you're going to end up with, you let it dry, and then you um, use something to set it, um, fixative, and then you might stain it or something. And on top of that, you can go and if you want to put something in there, then you paint over it. And if you look at Van Gogh's work, there's some paintings where you can actually see an underlying painting that he kind of ditched, but because of the cost of the canvases the and the preparation and all that stuff, didn't see any reason in starting anew. He just painted over what he already had. I did something kind of like that, but it was accidental. I was buying canvases from a friend, and I didn't really want to stretch my own canvas, which was um, involves putting together the frame using quarter round and some other stuff, and then you got to put the canvas over, and then you got to use a staple gun, and you got to staple on opposite sides as you're turning the canvas on the back, and then you have to put in support beams and and use glue and whatnot, and then staple the quarter round in, and uh, well, you do that before you put the canvas on, and then you have to gesso it, which is this white paint that's got um, it's got limestone in it. It's got these little Uliad creatures, which are it's actually the shells um, of the creatures that live on the top of the ocean that are the food for the fish. I took geology too, and that's what forms the limestone on the bottom of the ocean. And there's volcanic activity in the center of the Pacific Ocean that pushes the or is that the Atlantic Ocean has that the Pacific has the Ring of Fire uh, that also kind of pushes the plates of limestone. Then it subducts under the edge of the continent, and that's what formed the Mount St. Helens volcano. It occurs on the edges, and there's all sorts of stuff like the reason why it's not ever cold in like California has something to do with the weather patterns, and uh, the moisture gets pushed up the hill and it rains on the other side, and why Nevada is just like this desert. It's because it's a basin, and all the rocks that come down off of California's mountains and whatnot. So anyhow, so I was talking about uh, paintings, and I took a minor in art. I had a computer science major and a minor in art. It took me 10 years to get through college. My father determined that I needed it, and by about 5 years into it, I determined that this stuff was really not helping me, but I kind of felt if I uh, left my degree, then I wouldn't really maybe get a job. And later on, out of college, I didn't work for like 8 years, and then because I expected that because I had the education that people would hire me into, because coders, will learn things rather quickly. Whenever I was in the dot coms, I learned PHP rather quickly to start working on the website. And so I assumed, well, I would people would trust me enough to be able to um, pick up the languages that they desired that I know, in order to do the work. And there were things that stopped me, like the interview process, because I'm not very good at interaction and I can't even flirt very well. And so interaction with people in real time at some point ends up in a kind of an aggression because they start talking and I can't process what they're saying, and I know that they're completely not getting what I'm saying. So in order to get my word in and hopefully they'll understand, I talk over them, and people take that as an aggressive approach, and then they think, this guy is unruly, can't deal with them. And every time I'd go into a job interview, they would uh, I would get on the wrong topic. I'd get talking about Minecraft because I knew that Minecraft Redstone was implemented Boolean logic, and I thought it was a really smart thing to talk about because for a long time, Java coders never believed that Java could ever be used for a real time video game. That was one of the reasons why people were so freaked out in the coding community about it. But business types that would be interviewing you, even business tech people that would be interviewing you, um, would think that if you were into Minecraft, that you were not a hard worker, or that. So you have to present this idea that you're just the person they need, that you're going to do the stuff. It's kind of like that guy in Ghostbusters that said, do you believe in such, such, and such? And he says, "I'll if there's an honest check in it, I'll believe anything you say." That's the interviewing process, and I went through enough of it. And one time, I almost got the job, and I started saying, "Oh, I also do computer animation," and I lost the trust of the guy that was going to bring me in because he thought I was a jack of all trades and that I master of none, and that I wasn't a a surefire fit. And the contractor that I was going through um, said, "You shouldn't have done that. We had you in, but you shouldn't have said it. You shouldn't have brought that in. Things you learn." Um, I did all this stuff after the dot coms when I was in Manhattan. In Manhattan, a lot of people were saying to me that if you want to get a job in computers, you should go to San Francisco because Manhattan's all business types. Uh, they're not interested in uh, using Linux. I actually went to marthastewart.com and talked to this Italian coder. I mean, he had long hair. And it's obvious that Martha was involved in hiring him on because he looked fantastic. And I asked him, why don't you guys use Linux? Why do you use Windows? He says, "Oh, she dictates to us everything that we have to use. And so even if we wanted to use Linux, which we do, she wouldn't let us do it because she's such a micromanager." That's the reason why whenever um, they brought her in on that court case, that people were so eager to find fault with them is because there's so many people that hate her, you know, in Manhattan. She's just a hated person, and she's kind of like Trump, or Elon Musk, you know. So I was just kind of I had interviewed about like 50 times in Manhattan. I went to all sorts of places, and I got the feeling that there was nowhere I mean, I almost got a job for a place called Drumbeat Digital that was down on Green Street. Green Street's the part of Manhattan that It's where Andy Warhol and all of them were hanging out, was in a studio on Green Street. And so it was a really posh place. It was called Drumbeat Digital. And the lady that was hiring me on knew Pearl. And she was, being a Perl coder working in web development is like, you really have to be a wizard to use Perl in web development, because Perl is, um, it's highly cryptic. There, there is no one way to do things with Perl. It's very hard to read. It makes perfect sense to business types to use a language that's hard to decipher, because that keeps the people that buy their services from jumping ship and going to a competitor. I think that's the reason why a lot of these tech companies, these people that go to get work done, the there's a tendency to be all these languages and libraries that they use on their websites that are so ad hoc and so different from everybody else. And I think the tactic with this is to keep the um, client locked in. And it's also the reason why people have a tendency not to do stuff in open source, and certainly not in Manhattan. Um, I had a boss that was a guy I was working with. I was doing freelance. He was an AI guy. He had come to Los Alamos. This is after I left the dot coms. Um, and I was looking for work in Los Alamos, which is very difficult too. I wasn't willing to go and work at a at a um, discount store or anything like that. Um, I was very inflexible. I wanted a programming job, and that's almost the way to get a job at the labs is to be a contractor, because the funding that comes in is not always certain. Even these scientists have to change. Um, they have to change their school of thought, or their position. They have to go. There are people that go from being a chemist to being a physicist just to get funding to support them for a year. They will jump from one class of science to another. And my father came in as a nuclear physicist and came out as a laser physicist with some chemistry. And he was working with fluorine gas and trying to figure out how to create lower level nuclear waste from high level nuclear waste by processing it with lasers in fluorine gas. And to keep the gas locked up, you have these things called traps, and you got to fill them up with liquid nitrogen every night. And so some nights he would be like, "Oh crap, I forgot to fill my traps." And so he'll go back out to the lab at like 1 in the morning and go into his place and fill traps with liquid nitrogen, so he wouldn't lose his vapors that he had in there. So this all started off with me talking about different levels of communication. Um, but there's um, one of the things that I was working on with this guy this AI guy, um, who I was going to talk about, and then I guess I didn't start talking about him. He his name was David Kilman, and he started a project called Telemed with the Los Alamos National Laboratory, and it was a result of him wanting to automate surgeries. And he figured that he needed to have access to healthcare records. And then he determined that inside of hospital, our um, our hospital systems and whatnot, that the healthcare records were maintained on paper, that nobody actually put records into computers. The only stuff they managed and coded were insurance um, uh, documents to get paid from the insurance companies. And the reason why HIPAA regulations were put in place was to prevent healthcare information from getting in the hands of insurance companies. That's the reason why they code all the procedures that are done, is to remove all possible healthcare information from the documents, so the insurance companies aren't starting to sell like a president's healthcare record to point out that he had an HIV test, which would be really damaging politically. And so one of the things that he needed was a cradle to grave um, record, and he was going to use Corba. And a lot of the people that when all the stuff came about and the project was made, there were people from various private institutions like Microsoft that came in to get involved in the establishment of the standard, which is kind of a joke because Microsoft doesn't believe in standards. They were really there to prostitute people. They were there to sway the standard. They don't. The reason why they're not interested in standards is because standards are good for um, consumers. They're not good for companies, and especially not for Microsoft um, because they stand the chance for people to move to a different platform, and so they pushed XML instead of Corba. XML is a data format. It's a kind of an abstract data format that you can kind of just make it whatever you want, and it's got very simple syntax, and that is it's fairly close to a computer language called Lisp. So there are a lot of programmers that would say that XML was really just a ripoff of Lisp, um, but it was um, extracted from SGML, and it was kind of abstracted. It was abstracted from SGML. HTML stole some stuff from SGML, and but XML was just kind of this abstract way of defining a data storage format. The problem with XML and HTML and all those guys is you have to parse the data and turn it into something you can use, like a tree of information. So you can traverse the tree and extract the information. It takes forever to extract the information, and the most efficient you could ever get with it was to maybe use Java to manage it, or generate Java objects out of it. But even Java's an interpretive language because it uses tokens, and its symbol map is removed whenever you dump out a class. You can decode Java, but you don't get the names of the variables. That's what the symbol table's for. And so it's because of that business people tend to prefer Java to Smalltalk, because with Smalltalk is also an object-oriented language, but it also kind of an operating system that was designed at Xerox PARC, the Palo Alto Research Center, which is where Steve Jobs went uh, when Xerox wanted to see if he could somehow sell um, their computer that Xerox PARC was working on. And the reason why they got upset and said, you know, you're giving away the kitchen sink by letting this guy come in. And then Jobs saw what they had and said, I can't believe you guys, you idiots. Why are you not like doing this and this stuff? And he was just jumping off the walls. And the researchers at Xerox PARC, who had been given money for a certain amount of time, for like, they were given enough money to kind of do their research without any question from the management. The management, this is like the best situation a researcher, a learned researcher that has been through college can have, being given funding to, and um, one simple suggestion, and that is, um, we want you to design the future. And what we want is we want a paperless office. And so they go off and work on that. And we'll give you any amount of time, but so the researchers sit on beanbag chairs and sit there and think about stuff and drink tea or whatever and do their coding tasks and arrange meetings. And this guy, Alan Kay, Alan Kay, talks to his group and says, I also had a instructor named forgot what her name was. Oh, I took uh, I took programming practicum with her. It was about learning how to create interpreters in different languages using, and she wanted us to do it all in Pascal. So a C++ interpreter in Pascal, a Lisp interpreter in Pascal, a Prolog interpreter in Pascal, which is just insanity. But it's perfect for Pascal because Pascal was never meant to be a language that you would implement things in. It was meant to be a teaching language, and which sounds like Maya, which was really not designed to be a super functional animation package. It was designed to be something to teach 3D artists at schools, with the assumption that they would be hired in to places like Pixar, and those places have a tendency just because um, they want to keep the animators in their common tools. It's the same thing with Microsoft. They don't want you learning other people's tools. They want to somehow suck you into their organization because they don't want to lose you as a client. At Pixar, they don't want to lose you as an animator to DreamWorks or whatever. And so what they do is they develop in-house software. There's two reasons for that. One is so that they can create fantastic crap that nobody else can do in any other company. The second one is to create tools that will lock in the animators and their creative processes into that company. That when they go to work for DreamWorks, they're like, oh crap, they don't have this tool. They don't have that tool. Oh crap, I should have not left Pixar. And they're called handcuffs. There's silver handcuffs, golden handcuffs. Um, the level of the handcuff is determined by um, how much of a glue it is to keep the people in. So like a silver handcuff would be something like a 401k, or you know um, everybody gets 2 hour lunches or something like that. Um, and they have to put those things in to keep people from jumping ship. Anyhow, I never got into the animation industry. I had friends that did. I have a friend now that was going to be a jewelry. He got a degree. He got his bachelor's degree in designing jewelry design or whatever, in the art department. And I didn't know the guy. We just met at Al Posada, or La Posada. It's the name of the cafeteria in the UNM main campus, University of New Mexico. Uh, that's in Albuquerque, which is where Breaking Bad was filmed. Um, anyhow, we sat down for dinner one night, and I said, you really got to check out this 3D software. Get into this class, and they've got Wavefront, and they're fixing to have they may have Alias. We got all these SGI workstations, and he didn't know any of it, but he saw my enthusiasm for it, and he had a friend, a guy named Pat Dreesen, who he knew, and I guess asked him, and Pat said, "Yeah, you ought to come into this." And so he came in, and I kind of ended up being the instructor because our instructor kind of was a he was a an architect, and he had dyslexia, and what he did professionally was take uh, badly written blueprints and make them. And he had so much work that he had to do that he couldn't really even teach the class. He was really just a student the year before, um, and had worked with a guy named Jim Pinkerton to work on an animation that um, that was supposed to be entertaining and used actual forward inverse kinematics is mutations. Um, and people don't really use it that much anymore. Animators these days use something called pose to pose, which is closer to forward kinematics. It's interpolated forward kinematics. You rotate the arm, and then you interpolate from one position to another. And if they need to use it again, they get these guys um, uh, who work with skeletons, and they work with they create characters, and they do it mathematically, and they're called riggers characters. And so they'll put in all these like little sliders in 3D that will permit the artist to work in the moment and adjust the eyes and set the keyframe and adjust the lights and set the colors and bring in the images and stuff. And even now that they can work in the same environment together, we didn't have that. Um, we each had our own folder, and we had like 9 licenses of Wavefront TV, and this was before Maya. And we had some licenses of Explore, which included 3 Design, and 3 Design was a sculpturing program that was completely pop-up menu driven, and you could model anything pretty much, polygons, um, or NURBS surfaces, non-uniform rational view spline surfaces, which just mean that you can break continuity at any point across these things called isoparms, which ran in the UV coordinate system on the surface, but you couldn't put holes in them, which required something um, called uh, a Catmull Clark be polygons. That's how they made all the characters in Toy Story. And we were trying to create stuff with alias power analysis to define a curve on a surface and define the part of the surface that to an object. It's really sloppy and difficult to work with. I hated it, and Power Animator had so many bugs in it. It was worthless. And anyhow, I ended up teaching these guys and my friend, and he's now working on things like Kung Fu Panda. I have another friend that was in that class who works for Electronic Arts and has been ever since, like 20 years. on Madden football and things like that. Um, I know a guy that I met whenever I was volunteering and was the head of the volunteer group who works at Digital Domain, or he probably doesn't these days, but did way back in the 90s. I attended SIGGRAPH in 95, 96, 97, and 2000. 95 was in Los Angeles, 96 was in New Orleans, 97 was in Los Angeles, and 2000 was in New Orleans. And the the reason why I went the fourth time is because it was in New Orleans, because New Orleans SIGGRAPH rocked in 96. However, Microsoft had a party um, where they had, and we went over, my friends and we went over and we thought, this is going to be some party if Microsoft's doing it. And they had taken an entire house or like just this long building somewhere down in the part of the party was vampires, uh, suck your blood, and then um, and the early part of the party, it was perfectly okay, but then later on they started inviting people off the streets to come in, and you could not move through the building. It was just it was worse than going through a subway station in New York. I mean, it was worse than going through any. It was terrible, and went away with it thinking, that was what they really intended. They want to suck the blood out of everybody. They want to suffocate all these people, and it was stupid. But that was the worst part of that whole thing. The rest of it was fantastic. We went through the streets as a bunch of coders in a parade, and everybody was like happy, and they were telling, don't let anybody shine your shoes, because it was a common trap. You turn over or you let somebody shine their shoes, and then some people come out of the dark and take your wallet. And as we were marching along, we could see all these stupid people stopping and letting people shine their shoes. It was, it's kind of funny, kind of just surreal, but it was a fun time, and there was lots of great food, and uh, but the thing that happened in '96 was that Microsoft had bought up Softimage. Softimage was used for Reboot and used for Half-Life 2. What it did really, really well was manage large databases of data, of objects, of polygons. Everything in 3D is broken down into triangles, and the reason why is because a triangle can't be twisted. A square can be twisted, and the importance in that is that the way it lights the polygons is through the use of a thing called a surface normal. It's a vector that points out from the front and the back. Usually, it just points out the front, and if and they don't draw the back. That's the reason why if you play a video game and you get inside the object, everything is transparent, is because it's an optimization. It's you only draw the front facing parts of the polygons. The stuff that's pointing away, you don't draw. And so at the very least, you're making an optimization, a factor two optimization on the speed at which it renders the objects. And so the surface normals are just vectors of an indeterminate length, usually one, um, that are really just used for doing dot products and stuff, doing certain kind of math, for figuring out properties of stuff. And if you twist a square, you get as a result of a dot product, you get a vector, or is it a cross product? It's a cross product. You get a vector that's pointing. I think it's a dot product. You get a vector that's pointing um, parallel, tangent to the surfaces, and the effect of that is that it doesn't light very well. It doesn't light at all. The only way you can light the square is by putting the light tangent to the surface. And so instead of doing that, what you do is you tessellate to triangles, and the triangles can't, through the definition of the triangle, through the definition, the order of the vertices, um, you can specify vertices uh, in a certain order, and from that you can drive your edges, and you can drive which way the triangle is facing. So it makes there's a lot of reasons why you just want to use triangles in the end product. And cat smooth effects. It's kind of smooths out an object that's made with triangles or quads. And in on Blender we call them subdivision surfaces. On Lightwave they call them metanerbs. But it was the Catmull Clark. It was Ed Catmull and what's his name, Clark at Pixar, that came up with them. To deep detail on 3D animation. At one time, I thought I was going to be a 3D animator, and I made an animation that was pretty good. And then after that, Wavefront pulled our licensing and would not sell licenses to anybody of the software that I used. And I got so upset about that, and I asked a friend of mine, um, is there anything in open source? Because I knew freeware open source stuff would never leave my hands. It was unnatural for a tool you use as an artist to vacate your hands. I mean, paintbrushes don't do it. Um, I mean, you can make your own tools, but you can't do that for 3D graphics. And here were some business types that determined they didn't want to support people on the platform. They wouldn't even let you have tertiary licenses. They wouldn't let you. They said you could buy up. I said, can I get a license from somebody that already has the program? It says you can buy a machine that's got the license on it, but to reinstall it, you can't do that because we won't permit you to do it. And these licenses were maintained by licensed servers, which is such a new concept to me. And I saw it as rape. I saw it as just the most awful thing I'd ever seen. And it's just like what they did with music files at the time of when the music industry was um, trying to control people's access to music by putting um, signatures and encryption and stuff on the files so that you could only play them by certain players. People and businesses were um, using the new technology to control the access people had to products. And to some extent, I mean, it worked. It's okay now, but there's still injustice that occurs with it. Like I upgraded one of my iPads, and then Apple just determined that a copy of GarageBand that I had already purchased, I couldn't install on my new on the operating system on an existing iPad. I had to buy a new iPad so that I could get access back to GarageBand. And I put up a group on Facebook that's still there called Apple Failware, where I came up with this term called failware, which is, you know, Apple leveraging their ability to unnaturally control people's access to software. Now the software is put on web servers. And the reason why a lot of those did that is because people were stealing programs. But I just thought that they didn't think long enough about it, because if you're using a torrent to get a software off of a torrent site, if you're installing from untrusted sources, if you're counting that people are generally good, it's not true of sociopaths and psychopaths. There is going to be some way that you're going to pay for the software, even if you think it's free, because they're going to put some malware in there, and then they're going to install a rootkit on your machine, which is a method of controlling your machine without your knowing it. The rootkit hides from you, and then they can set up a botnet, and the botnet is a rootkit that uses your line to your internet to connect up to a thing called a IRC um, chat system, which was an old way of and still used. There were these servers where people would go and chat, and what they do is they have the programs um, connect to an IRC on a certain channel, and then the guys will issue commands to all of the bots on that channel in some sort of codified language, even maybe an encrypted message, and stick it in there. The bots read it off, and then they go off and perform on it. And the things that they do are stuff like attack corporate systems. This is how Korea attacked Sony. Um, I believe that's what they did. They used botnets to perform a denial of service attack on Sony, and did various sorts of things to get inside of Sony, and get access to their machines and whatnot, and all because they had published a movie that that poked fun at Kim Jong Un. So if somebody really wants to hurt your company, they can use one of these botnets. And the people that are helping creating the botnet are people that are going and installing software from untrusted sources. So now there is an actual reasonable reason to install software from places like the Apple Store, and that is to eliminate malware and to eliminate botnets and rootkits and stuff of that nature. Because if anybody sells a program through the App Store, um, Apple can monitor it, and if they can see that it's failing a number of people, they can chase down the guy who put the program up, because they require your tax ID and some identifying information. And if that guy had even used a library that was untrusted, and that was being used to break into people's machines, they'll prosecute them. And so coders, even malware coders or whatever, are less likely to put malware on a service like that, because they risk being imprisoned over it, or drawn to court, or having the money sucked out of them. You know, it's certain doom. And this all started with package managers on Linux, and um, package managers maintain that code is reused by one of the requirements of the GNU license is that, which GNU stands for GNU's Not Unix. It's a recursive acronym. This is one of the ideas of Richard Stallman, who came up with it. It's called copylefting. It's a way of putting something into public domain, but not like public domain. It forces everybody to distribute and share the programs. And the reason why he did it was because he was a part of MIT, of a community of coders that were working on a mainframe computer, and AT or Bell Labs had given them a copy of Unix and the source code, and it they formed a community around it and were um, involved in the fixing of the code and whatnot. And then Bell came along and said, "Well, you've had enough long enough time with this operating system, and you've worked out all the bugs for us. We're pulling the license." And so the thing that happened to me with Wavefront happened 20 years before, or 20 or 30 years before, with Richard Stallman, and it was Bell Labs this time, and it pissed him off so much. And then he started seeing his friends from the community being hired on to a company called Symbolics that were releasing a commercial version of Lisp. It didn't make any sense to Richard Stallman for there to be any commercial software, because up until that time, people were getting, if an institution got a machine, there was no individual that could afford a machine. And so it was encouraged that the engineers that were working on the machines to share the source code. So free source code or open source code predates commercial software. It was because of the release of microchips that permitted people to have computers at home and stuff that led to the privatization of source code. I'm sure there were probably people there trying to sell source. Um, it was a natural thing that was a part of the computers, the mainframes, because if a company was going to sell you a computer, they'd want you to make best use of it. And so they would provide all the source code you needed to do whatever it is you needed to do. And if you needed anything more, then you would have engineers that would go in and modify it to what was needed. But it, Richard assumed that would happen with Unix, and that they were using. And when that happened, when they pulled Unix licensing, he he and freaked out, and established a he established a organization, or it may come after a while, but he started writing up all of the tools that he remembered from Unix and was going to create an operating system called Herd. But he started out naming his organization GNU. GNU's not Unix, to say that we're not going to license, where you're going to be able to use the stuff forever. I'm going to make certain that nobody can leverage this out of your hands. And so when I was talking to my friend and say, is there any open source or freeware that's available, anything GNU supported, or even if it's just freeware, it's an already compiled binary. He said, yeah, there's this thing called Blender 3D. And I don't know about it. It looks kind of interesting, but it's got a crazy interface. And I said, oh, I'll go get it. And so I got it. SGI. It ran in a megabyte of RAM. It was so small that I could run it on an Iris with or an Indigo, one of the purple ones, with a R3000 in it, and only like 15 megabytes of memory, and a 256 color card, which is the basic minimum, with some 3D graphics ability, OpenGL. I could run Blender in that. I could at best do mess around with metaballs, which was which was what's called a CSG, a constructive solid geometry type. it basically just define some spheres, and then you define a surface of polygons that run over the spheres and connect them together. I'm gonna have to. I'm getting reports that this thing is running down on its power. Uh, this is how my talks tend to be, and people tend to leave, and then they come back, and I don't care. I'm pretty sure the live stuff ends up in your account afterward. If not, I'll just enjoy the fact that I got to talk about it, because every night now and then it kind of makes you happy to talk about stuff that even though some people probably wouldn't care. Um, but there was a time when it was cool to be able to talk about it, and people in the animation class would go, "Oh wow, you know so much shit." Um, So going back, I made an animation on Wavefront TV. They gave me an award, $2,000 scholarship. It was a student award. I probably should have tried for it because I presented myself as a sophomore, I think, or as a junior, and I wasn't a junior. I had already had about 5 years in college, but they gave me the award because I had heard that someone said there's no possible way an animator or an artist could ever use Wavefront to make anything, because it was originally designed for scientists to create visualizations so that they could get funding from military types, because the military types don't understand anything about science. So you got to put things in their terms. You got to say, well, this is the kind of bomb we could create with our research. And then the military types, oh, we need to put some money into it. Because the government gives the military more money than they give their researchers in the labs. And so the scientists have to put things into terms that lay um, administrators and military types can understand, so they can get funding. So they don't have to get another degree to get funding from somebody else. And like I was talking about, get go to another part of the lab and get some simple job and develop the expertise to, and then get a like a degree or whatever, or a side degree to, so they can get into, however that works. And people find ways to get other people in, even if they don't have experience. It it goes on, um but that's how the labs work, and it's because it's a government thing. The government, the funding is not certain. It's if it was a private institution, the there would be a reason to make money off of it. If it's a government thing, then there's a reason for the research to exist, because it's going to be for the protection of the citizens and stuff. And people say the government creates crap with the money that comes from the taxpayers. It's not true in the research or areas, because they're um, because scientists vetted among all the other guys that are there, and if there's anybody that's seen use really smart technology and stuff, so they're going to pick the best languages. They're going to pick the stuff that's will scale and is most flexible and stuff. But if anybody wants to end a project, which they did with my boss, they have to prove to some administrator that they're competing with private industry. And so a bunch of Microsoft vendors, according to my boss, said some Microsoft vendors came in and said they're keeping us from selling Excel and Word, and it was not the case. He was coming up with new technology that would permit clinics and hospitals and whatnot to integrate with each other, and in a very secure way. And the best security you can ever have is to log access, to verify credentials. So a doctor comes in, he gets access to the machine, he has to provide credentials. And then after the credentials, there is a logging of his access and a mention of what it is he's accessing at that time. And they had all the technology to create the interfacing of this stuff inside of Corba, which is a common object request broker something or interface or something, and uh, and it's meant to be not a language but an infrastructure that a style of an ADT, an advanced data type, or something, a schema, or a tool set for creating schemas, creating organizations of software and machines in order to do um, particular areas of a business. Um, in this case, they had a number of interfaces, and one was called React uh, something. It was called RAD, RAD Access Decision, um, which was a simple interface that was well thought out and implemented in Corba. In Corba is an object-oriented environment. Object-oriented environment means that um, you have the data, the stuff that you're working on. Um, if you're working with an object, all the things that have to do with the information that's in the object are built into the object, either through inheritance from a related object that has similar data, or um, through abstraction, having the format of a common object or whatever. And it really doesn't even have to be a programming language. It can actually be wrapped around pretty much any kind of functional code in a system. It can be even wrapped around an organization. It makes the organization look like an object. And it was designed to work with parallel computers. It was designed to work fast. And this stuff was going to be made up in that format so that vendors could all connect together, connect their software together, and it would make best use of the doctor's time. Because the worst case scenario with a doctor is they end up stop being professionals, stop being medical doctors, and end up becoming computer programmers because of the um, all the um, all the vaporware, all the ghostware, all the stuff uh, that they buy from vendors that starts to fail them. All the crutchware, all the stuff, the lock in, um, which exists to a high degree in our medical institutions and contributes to the cost of healthcare. Um, if a clinic has a database of patients and their healthcare information, even if it's just insurance um, coding stuff. And as I said, coding of insurance, whenever you're trying to get claims from the insurance company needs to know what it was that you did, but they can't do it in such a way that you would divulge healthcare information. It has to be kind of abstract. And from that, you code it in to a form, and that means code means here using references to the procedures and enumerating them and putting them on the form so they can go back and look to see what it was. And there are people that have a position of doing this all day, taking the procedures that were done and translating them into something that the insurance company can look at so they can process their claims. This is also a reason why doctors hate uh, working with this stuff. One of the things that happens with with this stuff, and reason why there's a reason why you go to a doctor and everybody's on an HMO, and the HMO will only pay the doctor like 10% of will pay them for 10 minutes. So the doctor, in order to get the kind of pay he would expect to have, will bring in uh, 6 patients, put them each in a room, make each one wait about 50 minutes, see them for 10 minutes, and then go to the next patient. And so they basically assembly line their patients in order to get paid well enough to support their clinic. And then on top of that, they've got the potential of being slapped with a malpractice suit. And the problem with malpractice suits is that is that if you get if you get taken down by some patient who, for some stupid reason, thinks that doctors are miracle workers and that the surgery should have gone well or whatever, and believe that the doctor is flawed, they'll slap a malpractice suit on that doctor and come in and litigate it. And this was told to me by a relative who was in the field. And the reason why he stopped becoming a doctor was because of these malpractice suits, because he could see himself just somewhere down the road not being able to continue on, not because he would be like liable or anything, but because that it could happen, that it's such a there's so much weight put on it, and it's such a threat to the medical community in America that it's detrimental really to people getting good health care here, because anybody that could be a professional might lose their job, and then you've got a loss of um, of talent. It just sucks people out, and it'd probably be reasons for them to go to other countries is because of all this heavy legislation or whatever that they could be kicked out. Because when you get slapped with a malpractice suit, it isn't a light thing. What happens is they take your practice, they take your license, and well, they take your malpractice insurance because they need lawyers to protect you. And so the lawyers take the insurance, I think, and then uh, you lose. So I said it was you lose your malpractice insurance, you lose your license because when they've proved that you were dumb, or that you couldn't do the work, or that you did something wrong and you should have been better at what you were doing, or so you lose your license, you lose your practice because now you can't make money. And so it's certain death for doctors, that stuff. So there's all sorts of reasons in America why not to be a doctor. And the reason why doctors want to be doctors is because they naturally, a good bit of them naturally want to heal people. It's something they've always wanted to do. They are like extreme empaths. They can see making a change in the world. And there are crooked doctors who can see that people put so much trust in the medical profession that they can almost be like a god, and they can demand all sorts of money. George Harrison had one of these guys. whenever he had cancer and he was on his deathbed. This guy came in and said, "Well, the only way I'm going to do a procedure on you is if uh, if you sign this guitar." So he wanted him to sign a guitar, and there's George Harrison who can barely move his hand, and somebody's like actually helping him sign this guitar, and the doctor takes it, and that's a psychopath. They do exist in the medical profession, and it's because they can detach themselves from the patient they're working on. That's the reason why you'll find doctors who, like that one that was treating pregnant. It was, I guess, it was a gynecologist who is treating pregnant women and are delivering babies. They've got a little bit of empathy, and they statues of predators because they identify with predators. They don't identify with you. Dahmer, they not mind if there's so many of them in the prison system is because that, and it's, you still have to some degree as an empath feel sorry for them because it's a dysfunction inside of their body. It's not something that they had any control over. They grew up with it. They were born with it. And there are people that can learn to be like psychopaths. And someone told me that in um, in training police officers, they actually try to make people um, uh, uh, disassociate or try to keep them from, because the potential that they won't follow through with chasing a combatant or a criminal. The guy who killed George Floyd, all of his merit, go in and look all of his merit. Research this if you think I'm crazy. Go and research all of the stuff, all the awards that he got in his merit. I looked into it once, and I haven't gone back and looked, so I don't know, but you can do it. He got merit for killing people in pursuit. That was like the majority of everything. So this was a guy, his he was hired on, and the institution he was hired into must have known he was a psychopath. But they hired him in because he executed. They would needed to put him into jail or anything. anything. He had serious talents. And these are the kind of guys you want to bomb falls next to somebody who's seen and they identify with people. Their best friend that they once had developed a relationship with is all of a sudden gone. They turn to and the psychopath is the guy you want there because he's going to follow through with the policy and he's not going to feel fear. And if he's somebody who was raised positively, had good parents and stuff, and he wasn't abused as he grew up, and his parents were able to discipline him and everything, he is going. He will know that his problem is, but he has a superpower, and that superpower is to execute and perform a duty. Um, and he takes great pride of that nature. He's the ultimate alpha male. I lost connection. I guess I got it back. That's a great reason for having these live connections. Sorry about that. It disconnected. Anyhow, that's the reason why you want to have a psychopath on the front lines with you. So if you go and look at Straight Metal Jack and you got that one guy who's like really wanting to kill people, that's your psychopath. Um, you want to be on his side. You want him on your side because he's the guy that's going to get you out of the jungle when the shit hits the fan and everybody turns to jello. He's going to be the guy that's going to get you on the copter. And so they don't throw those guys away in the army or in the military. You know, if they find somebody like that, it's like in a research facility finding a high functioning autistic person. They're going to do something that nobody else has the capability of doing. In the case of research, you have a Asperger's, a high functioning autistic person who has a degree in some science and will do what's an extreme vertical. It's kind of like an astronaut. They're going to go and do research in an area that just bores the other scientists to tears because it's such a narrow vertical. And there's like it can be things like this guy only works on arrays of satellites and nothing else, and he knows how to design the glass and such that it's perfectly flat and perfect, and he's got all these techniques and stuff, but it's such a vertical that it doesn't permit you to do anything else. You're gonna go bored to tears. You're gonna feel your life is meaningless, and you know that's the reason why they get those guys in. Pixar had a guy who I got to know that I determined because he had this monotonous voice, because some autistic people have a monotonous voice, and he had one. And I since determined that he was autistic, that he was high functioning autistic. And the area of research he did was on uh, skin science, on creating um, believable skin on creatures. And he did the skin for the Coca-Cola polar bears, which predates stuff like Toy Story by like about 5 or 6 years. That was stuff that was going on, even before the Michael Jackson black and white video. Any of the stuff in the 90s, there was stuff that Pixar was doing way before, um, that was fantastic. I don't think it was that far before, but it was before. I think it was before Toy Story. That wasn't Pixar. That was Blue Sky that he did that for. And what led to him being hired at Pixar. He animated Dollhead in the movie Pixar. What they did is they took all their engineers and their technical directors and stuff. They got them involved. This is the way artists are: is they want to get the entire company involved in doing something in the art of things. so everybody feels together and at one. It's kind of like dancing in the streets. You feel like you're part of the community. So the artist kind of wanted some of that stuff to be done by the engineers, and actually the engineers have to be involved because these were toys that were destroyed by Sid. And so Dollhead, and then you had the guy that was on the skateboard. Those characters were animated by engineers, and this guy was an engineer, and so that's the reason why Dollhead goes up to the side and goes tink 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 on the pipe. That's all he had to do to be in the movie. He rigged the character, and then he had it do this animation, made him feel like he got his mark in the movie. I also got to meet the guy who did all the eyes in Toy Story, a guy named Ash Brannon. This young guy, he went and looked at our animation that we were doing. Uh, we After I created my animation that got the award, our the second semester of that class, which was a CS 390. That's an elective. It's not an actual program. We didn't have an animation program. All we had was a bunch of licenses of Wavefront software and some SGIs, and they had convinced the 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 university computer sysadmin there to spend some funding on get us some SGI workstations. Uh, they got two challenges, and a challenge is a $60,000 R4400 based SGI. And then they had R5000 based indies, which were these computers that came out a little bit later and had a webcam with them. And they had some Indigos, and they had the SGI had lent the computer science department a double reality engine for R10000, or it was R8000. I think it was R8000 based um, Onyx. It was not a full Onyx. It was like one of those small uh, models, and I got to use it on my animations. And then across the street in the Lee Gallus building, which was used to be an auto park, the Maui High Performance Computing Center in Hawaii wanted a counterpart on the UNM campus, and they opened up a facility that had like four power onyxes or something. It had just this crazy amount. What they had, like a power onyx or two in there, and then they had uh, a whole slew of power onyxes at in Maui. And since it was like a government facility, they had to give access to the public. And so we could go in there, and if we needed to do some really hardcore rendering, we could put our stuff in there. And if we could get it on, they had Wavefront, they had everything. And we could get that stuff rendered out like super fast. So we had the resources, we just didn't have the curriculum. And it was after I was there, after I left school there in '98, that he started to have Pixar came in and worked with them, and uh, you New Mexico started providing incentives to filmmakers to come out and film in New Mexico, and Sony set up a facility for making movies there, and I think it's still going. And so they came up with a few classes where Pixar, people from Sandia and Pixar would be involved in training people. I don't know if it's still going on. What I've learned within the past several years, and my friend who had worked on that I got to know, who had worked on the Coca-Cola polar bears, a guy said it was high functioning autistic. That's just an assumption. I don't know if he is. He said, um, it's over with. There's nothing. The magic hat is has left the building. Pixar is no longer fun. It used to be a fun place to work. It isn't anymore. And that's because they sold it off to Walt Disney, I mean, to Disney, and, it all shifted hands. And the reason why they wouldn't let Steve Jobs come out there and um, visit the studio whenever they only had about 50 people working full time at it was because they had a community. They had this ecosystem that they knew if Steve came out, having heard what he had done at Apple by pitting the Mac developers against the Apple developers and just kind of poo-pooing the Apple development because he believed that the Macs would just catch on instantly. You know, the guys at Pixar knew for certain that Steve Jobs would ruin the community at Pixar and the animators would leave and all that stuff. So they said, um, we we have a requirement. You can, you know, it's great, that you bought our facility from Industry Light and Magic, which is a result of uh, a backlash from George Lucas making the movie Howard the Duck. It had an effect of him having to. There was like a number of things that happened that kind of crap hit the fan, and he had to get rid of ILM. And so he sold ILM to Steve Jobs, and that's the reason why there's a Pixar. And some of the first things they tried to sell were computer hardware, monitors, Pixar monitors. The other things that their main meat and potatoes were making advertisements for guys like Listerine and the sale of a program called RenderMan, which was a was the where the ideas for shaders came from. Um, there was a program called Moon um, Render Tools. What was it called? Uh, Forgot what the name of it was. This offshoot, somebody's freeware offshoot of the RenderMan language or description language for rendering scenes, and it implemented ray tracing, whereas Pixar didn't use ray tracing. Toy Story had no ray tracing in it whatsoever. Because one of the problems with ray tracing is it isn't even real ray tracing, and on top of that, accurate reflections. You have to manipulate things to a certain degree to tell stories, and ray tracing is so physical and so perfect that certain properties of objects like reflections on mirrors and stuff just would have to be manipulated to a great degree just to get the kind of things that you would expect to get, things that would be necessary in order to tell the story. And artists will assume that they can do things like get a reflection of um, of Lightyear. What is his Buzz Lightyear? Get his face on on the helmet, um, and have it show up in the camera in the movie, show it up in the film. See the reflection so that you knew that that was Buzz Lightyear looking through his helmet at Woody. You did that with ray tracing. What you would get is this really distorted face with the big nose. Um, Take a sphere or whatever and get inside of it and look at your face in the sphere. And I mean, it's just like going to a house of mirrors. Everything gets distorted. It doesn't come out looking the way you want it to. So what you do is you manipulate it through the shader language. You come up with special shaders that get you the effects you want artistically. And that's what RenderMan was for. And it was incredibly slow because it wasn't doing ray tracing. Actual ray tracing is too computationally intensive because It makes no sense. I guess if we come up with quantum computing, it will be possible to do real ray tracing. But current ray tracing is backwards. You trace rays from the screen to the objects, and you look for lights, and that determines if the things you bounced your eye rays off of contribute any color to the pixel that the eye ray came from. So it goes backwards. It isn't tracing light from the lights to the screen because the screen occupies such a small part of the environment. I mean, just think how big the the screen's going to be if you got a 35 meter. So you got this little screen, and you're tracing from every light about millions and billions of light rays. They're bouncing off of everything, and those are producing um, secondary and tertiary reflections that have to be computed in to the pixels on the film if they ever contribute to the film. Now you probably could expedite it by first doing it backwards and then doing it forwards, or you could so the you would find the paths that were relevant and where to shoot the light rays. Ways of doing it that you get something that's kind of accurate. But my father had to do the he had to do because he was a laser physicist. He couldn't do the kind of computer graphics ray tracing. He had to do the real ray tracing, where you're tracing from the laser to the objects and getting the reflections and computing how much of the radiation is left in each split, and where you'd have to put mirrors in order to contribute a little more or be able to detect. In some cases, you would use a mirror in order to cut off a certain amount of the energy if you're trying to find a certain spectrum in whatever it was that, say, the laser was going through some gas and you wanted to um, collect information on a component of the gas. You would use some technique in order to shave off some of that using the laser light. I'm sure it was something like that he did these computations for. I never got into it because at the time, to me, it was just so difficult to think about that stuff. I mean, he hated computers. I hated physics, you know, because he'd start talking about stuff and it'd just fly over my head. And then I'd talk about stuff and it'd fly over his head. One time, I almost got into a fight with him just learning how to do proofs. I still don't even know how to do a proof. Um, to me, it's mumbo jumbo. It's things you say in order to sound to go through a process of of being the concepts together to understand why you have to say this is the base case. This is this. If it's true for this, it must be true for that, which implies that it's true for this. And people in computer science, when they get into grad school, they do proofs on their programs. The reason why is because they want to guarantee, or they want to show a good example. They want to give enough of an argument to say that the programs they're coming up, the stuff they're coding, is going to scale with the problem, and it's going to run efficiently. And I failed P and NP complete. Um, I failed that class 4 times because the guy that I was learning from was this French guy named Bernard Moyer, or it's like Bernard something, uh, Moray. I think it was like Bernard Moray or something like that was his name. And he's this French dude that had this beard and glasses, and he would write with one hand and erase with the other on this very small blackboard. It was 3-pane blackboard. And every now and then he'd say, okay, this symbol represents this idea. This symbol represents this idea. But he wouldn't write down on the board for efficiency reasons what those ideas were. The rest of the people were okay with it. Me, having aphasia, had no way of being able to keep track of what he was saying and writing it down inside my notebook. And in order to somehow get some idea of what was going on, I went to the ITV, which is where they had their videotapes of the classes. I went to ITV and looked at the courses, the classes, and the ITV is really for people that want to take the courses off campus. This is before the internet. And so they would send cable transmissions to, actually, it wasn't before the internet, but it didn't make sense to use the internet because they already had the stuff set up. But it was a way for grad students at the lab, at the Los Alamos lab through UNMLA, to take courses down on main campuses so they could get credit, so that they could get into extra areas of the lab and make more money. And his was videotaped, as a number of them were. They had the video cameras coming from the ceiling in every single room, videotaping what those guys were doing. And I used those videotapes, and I would sit up on a Friday night until like 11 at night trying to figure out what the hell this course was about, this certain class was about, and what he was talking about, and trying to make sense of what these symbols were, and it just blew past me. And by the fourth semester that I took in it, I said, there's no way I'm going to finish this. I have to get my degree and get out. And I talked to my uh, the guy you talk to whenever you're discussing your degree, the advisor. I talked to my advisor and I said, there's no way I'm going to finish this. What can I do? He says, well, you can petition the course off, but if you fail this course, you're not going to get a grad degree. And I was like, I don't give a fuck about a grad degree at this point. I've made this animation over here. I'm sure to get an animation job somewhere, or, it never entered my head for some reason that I could get into Pixar as a technical director, because that would have been more likely than be an animator. Animators require of animators that they go to Ringling School of Design, and for 2 years it's like at $10,000 a semester, which blew my mind. And a lot of people said, "Oh, it's okay. There are plenty of scholarships that will pay for that stuff." And I was just like, I could look at my brothers who went to ACLU and Abilene Christian University, ACU. They went to ACLU, something completely different. They go to ACU and end up with these crazy scholarship or crazy loans, student loans. And there's like no way in hell they're ever going to get off of those student loans. They're still paying them. My middle brother's still paying them, and he should have a house because the guy's got a PhD in computer science, and then he's working with fault tolerant systems and and cell networks and all sorts of shit. He's done AI. He tells me, oh, those cars that Google's working on and that GM's got all their money in, that are supposed to be like driving themselves. It's a joke. They're not driving themselves at all. In fact, even that project that they had up in San Francisco, where they were going to have all these, they're going to have a test bed where they would have these certain cars doing playing taxi or whatever. They're not even working, and it's because the sensors that you would need, the amount of reasoning ability you would need to drive a car is just way beyond what you can train an AI to do because they are always running into new stimulus. It just doesn't lend itself to an AI algorithm. And so all these people that are getting up in arms on YouTube about AI eliminating their jobs are not are so stressed out and their brains are not even working. All the guys on YouTube know this is happening and they're using it as clickbait to boost their viewership. Beato and all those guys are making, or Beato will only cover Suno. He won't cover UDIO. If he did, he'd lose a good bit of his viewership. He needs a straw man to beat up to make the artists, the musicians feel good that AI is going away, which is complete bullshit. But there are things that AI can't do. And one of them is drive a car. Not unless they put them in a virtual world and run them for a large amount of time, and then they give all of the possible things that can go wrong in the world that they have to manage. Then yeah, maybe, but it's a reasoning problem more than it is it's kind of like, in order for the AI to, the way they train them now, in order for an AI to know what to do in any situation in driving a vehicle, it has to have been trained on every possible case. And the only way it could do that is with possibly with a quantum computer, by splitting the problem up until these probable situations and stuff, and using qubits, which don't use ones and zeros, they're variable. I don't even understand it myself, but I don't even know how they're going to make a computer out of it. It's, at this point, it's just an interesting way of storing information and collecting it and stuff. I guess the idea is it has something to do with the way that electrons behave on a very in a certain way, the magnetic properties or whatever that might be used to create a computation. The idea is that somehow it'll become massively parallel, cheaply massively parallel. And so if they develop a quantum, if they create a quantum computer, it will have a profound parallel computation abilities, and that all of these algorithms that were too complex for a sequential computer will open up, and they'll be able to pursue things they've never been able to pursue because the proofs proved that the code was geometric scale, that as you increase the size of your load, it goes up exponentially, or by some exponent. And if there's an exponent in there, there's no way in hell you're going to be able to compute that stuff for the kind of things like volumes of air or whatever that have billions of particles or whatever. It's not going to scale up for those things. There's certain things that scientists and computer guys can touch, and there's certain things they can't touch because the complexity is so great. I mean, it's not the complexity, that the scale complexity, that they're geometric. There's no computing on the, it goes up to a point to where the only way you could compute for these NPP complete, or these solutions that can't be implemented, is to create a computer that, as it scales, you have enough computational resources to cover the Earth, and then cover the solar system, then cover the universe. And it'll never happen in a million years unless we come up with something that takes advantage of parallel universes, which is where all this quantum stuff's going. Because at the quantum level, physics doesn't perform it. Newtonian physics breaks down, and things don't perform the way we expect them to. They perform a different way. And the things they say about it, like if you observe the system, it sets the state. It sounds like total lunacy to me. That sounds like we're in a simulation. That's what that sounds like to me. That once you observe it and it sets it, what's happened is that you've made a choice and you're set in a certain state, and that state's not going to change until you start spinning those electrons again, or you put them in. They're set in that state. So the minute you observe them, what's happening is you're in a simulation, and that's all they're. and and all those people that believe in predestination are going to go, oh, that proves predestination. There isn't predestination. What's happening is what somebody said. This is my belief. This is what's happening. There are two things that are possible here. One is there isn't a God, and there's parallel universes, and every time you make a choice, you're launched into a parallel universe. There is a God, and that's being done, or God has supreme intellect that God can see all possible futures. In every choice that everybody makes, if God's working for you, God's going to be going down and preventing certain things from happening by not directly changing them, but working with other people on their problems. And you've probably heard this thing that God is, and this is all belief. Belief is the area that science ends at, because science is the study of the observable universe. If you can't observe it, it's not science. Beyond science is belief, and belief is the stuff you can't observe. You can only have assumptions about. You can only think about deeply, and it's stuff you can't touch because you don't have a quantum computer. You don't have the way to even touch it, because none of the algorithms scale to that amount of and there's no way in hell you're going to come up with all of the equipment necessary to find out something about the universe that's occurring way over here, you know. And then there are all these people that are so intent on there not being a God that they're going to come up with some sort of idea in order to, that they say that, oh no, this is absolute science. This science is, science is going to come up with all the answers. And that's a belief system. You've just created a religion there. The religion is that scientists are going to come up with all the solutions. And the scientists know that once they get into that stuff, and this happens once they get into the science of doing the stuff that they trained to do in college, there are going to be people in there that are working on junk science, and there are going to be people that are actually doing real research. And the guys that are doing real research, no matter what their belief system, their science is going to sell them something that's completely contrary to everything they were trained in. And then they don't know how to deliver that sort of thing, or they're not going to make any discoveries at all in that area. And either they have to switch fields or kill themselves, or come up with or offload their stress onto I forgot what it was. The killer app of VR is meditation. So they have to come up with some sort of meditation exercise to get rid of the stress, because if they can't get rid of the stress, their brain stops working. They will kill themselves because their brain stops working. They lead into stupid thinking. That's the reason why you need something to relieve the stress. And one of the ways to relieve stress is to look to a higher power. What you're doing there is your you're offloading your responsibility. You're offloading your responsibility to, I mean, you become so prideful and so arrogant and whatnot that you get to a point to where you find out that you don't know enough, and you turn in on yourself, and uh, you don't know how you can continue to live and all this other stuff because you fail yourself. You fail your inner child. That your inner child said, I'm going to be Superman someday, and then you find out it's impossible. And then what do you do as a result of it? I know it sounds silly, but there are people that are like that, and they'll say some really silly things, and it's because they had no belief system to begin with. They were developing belief systems from just crazy, just superstition and ideas that they had developed but didn't test, and hearing conspiracy theories from other people, and you know where do you go whenever you don't have the answers? For some people, it's easy because they don't have to deal with. They don't have such a high opinion of themselves, I guess, and so they know they can fail, and so they don't fail miserably whenever shit hits the wall. They just shrug their shoulders and move on. But some people don't do that. And those guys need a belief system. They need something to believe, something to pick them up whenever the shit hits the fan and let them go on, because the cognition jumps out the window. Their empathy's gone. They don't, they think they're the only ones in the universe. They're almost like a psychopath. They they can't talk to anybody. All sorts of shit goes wrong whenever you're dealing with catastrophe. Religion is really, there's I'd put Christianity in a separate box because there's logic in it. There's a lot of logic in it. But the there are a lot of Christians who will say the same things over and over again and not ever really read into it or even listen to other people. And those are the ones that say meaningless shit to you, and you go, that means absolutely nothing to me. Jesus is the lamb who died, you know, and they don't even bother to go figure out what that's all about. And so they just tell their friend, and it's just like, hocus pocus, Gnostic, special information. I'm a magician. I know all these things, but I don't know why this is important information. You know, and then there's things inside the Christian religion that says, the reason why they hate us is because of what we are, and those things in there, um, I believe, are there to permit people to go on whenever they don't really have an argument and they don't have the intellect to deal with the hard questions. Because how are you going to continue on with a belief system? How are you going to continue on with any kind of lifestyle that is effective to other people, because you can see them out there and they're having fun and they're effective, and you can't get into that lifestyle? How are you going to maintain that lifestyle if you're so easy to sway? Your understanding and it's so easy for somebody like a sociopath to come along and use their social engineering to make you think that what you believe is complete bullshit and all those other people are crazy, but you can see that they're living well, and they've got a lifestyle that you would like. But then you start trusting the sociopath, and the sociopath's going to try to figure out how they can get you to do stuff for them, because you believe in this stuff, you'll believe in anything. If we can manipulate you if you can be manipulated to believe that stuff, you could, and if you're easy enough to sway belief in, we can get you to work for us. And they look for guys like that. There are some people that have been cheated so much by sociopaths and stuff like that, and people like that, that they can't possibly believe in anything. And they need absolute proof of everything, and they can't really venture into the world because they're fearful of stuff that they don't understand or won't understand because they won't pursue it. So there's a lot of things in the Christian religion that make sense. Donald Knuth, the guy that came up with tech, he's a Christian. Tell that to any computer science type, but especially the Indian grad students. Say, he's a Christian. And they say, oh, and you say, he's the father of computational theory. And they know that, and they won't touch it with a 10-foot pole because it's a worldview they don't share. Some of them will buy into it, but pantheism, superstition, all that stuff is all kind of lumped together. How I think it happens is you have a catastrophe in the world, and you don't want that catastrophe to happen again. And naturally, as humans, we want to, or men mainly, we want to engineer things such that catastrophes have no effect over us. We either do that with science, or if we have no intellect, we turn to superstition and building idols and worshiping idols, because somehow we're going to have some control, or we believe that the one that's in control will see all the things we are doing, that we're doing, and hopefully they'll appease us and stop the catastrophes from happening. And if you go through and you read through the Bible, you'll realize that a lot of what was done in there was to prove to people all the ways that you would worship a god, or you would try to manipulate the universe, is just not going to fly, because it makes no logical sense to do that stuff. And so you got these people worshiping trees, or going to Zozobra, or going out into the desert and burning effigies in order to deal with, to have some sort of catharsis, to deal with the depression and all the stuff that they can't think about, that they need to offlane to something else and hope that it gets taken care of and they never have to deal with it again. And the reason why they have to do that is because they look at Christianity and they look at all the stupid Christians in their lives that have come up and have chastised them for being gay and all this stuff, and they can't believe that stuff. They won't even enter there, because they've had so much bad experiences in the past with things like Catholicism, and which is practically ruled by ritualism and a bunch of bullshit that Jesus warned against, like false idols, the Pope, hierarchies. Look at heaven. Heaven's not a hierarchy. It's a flat organization. The greatest in heaven are the ones that serve. And then we got this word we call, people, as a bad word, a cuck, which is somebody who serves somebody like a sociopath and isn't strong enough to leave and go someplace else. If you told a Christian, or if you told somebody that likes to use that word, that heaven is full of cucks, and the greatest one in heaven is a cuck, then, or could be perceived as a cuck, They would be like, there'd be no way that they could ever be Christian again, or Christian at all, or switch over. And that was the thing that Jesus was really talking about whenever he was saying that people hate you for what you are, is because it makes no natural logic, because of the way that we live our lives to survive and stuff, that money is imperative. It's necessary. Certain things are necessary, and anything contrary has got to be insane. You know, Socialism must be insane because I'm giving all this money to the government and they're giving it to these other people that don't work. You know, so you come up with all of these ideas that work contrary to their common sense. And so what really is said in the Bible, again, and it makes perfect sense, is that the world's fucked and there's no way to fix it. In fact, it was made fucked up to begin with. There was a purpose for it, to exhibit all of the nuances of choice. The flip of that is sin. The reason why it's called sin is because God has a will. God has a certain way of people living that's defined out. And if you're intent on finding how you fit in it, even when the others say that you can't possibly, you'll find it either through the Bible or through the Holy Spirit will come to you and give you words that nobody else has will describe things and give you experiences that will help you understand that you're okay. But there are people in the world who call themselves Christians that use the Bible like it's law. That means they expect everybody to be able to live by all the things that Jesus said, don't go sin again. The thing I answer to that is that Jesus was saying that as part of the policy of going through this whole process. It was kind of like he was like, like that's going to happen. People are always going to be sinning from here until they're dead. But at that point, he wasn't on the cross. So all he could say is, don't sin again. And once he was on the cross and he died, did he say it again? Didn't he say, don't go sin again? And so there are people that are so stuck in this idea that the Bible's law that they think that it could work on a government, a theocratic system, a theocracy like Ireland. They believe that Catholicism can work as a system of government, and I think Jesus pointed out that there's no way that can ever happen. The Old Testament is proof that theocracy can't work even when God's involved. And in all the cases that God presented, all the different ways that you could appease God just didn't work. And at the very end of it, you end up with these guys called Pharisees who put all their pride, who are arrogant, and they have all their value and their ability to know all sorts of things about the Bible, but they don't do any of them. They don't behave in alignment. They use it to get into parties, and it's a vanity play for them. And Jesus comes in and ruins the potential for them to live like that from then on. Their tune's going to have to change, or they're out. They're out philosophically. And the people who were selling idols wanted Jesus dead because he was talking about a single God, and a single God that didn't want any idols before him. So it pretty much ruined their business. And so they're like, Jesus is on the out. Then he had some other people that were following him that wanted him to become ruler over the earth, so that according to the prophecy, he would become king. And their assumptions of what a king was somebody who who am I still recording? Yeah, this has been going 173 minutes. Um, they assumed that being king meant he was going to be king on earth. So he goes through the prophecy, they lay him on a donkey, and they have the palm branches that satisfy the prophecy. And that was just to say that God's here on earth. He's the Christ, God with us, That's what Christ means. And there are Jews who don't believe Jesus is the Christ. They believe he's a great teacher, but he's not the Christ. So they're still looking for the Christ. And they're still doing all the old stuff that from the Torah and whatnot. They're just abiding by all that stuff and keeping their phylacteries long and all that. And all that stuff was really just God, like, setting out all sorts of things to see how devoted people would be to that. But also to kind of point out to them, this is crazy. You can't live like this. And but how else are you going to prove it than to let them experience what it's like to live in a very strict, to live with God is very difficult because God can't possibly sin. God, if you have a God that has a complete understanding of everything, has absolute perception, there's no possible way the guy can fail. And if anybody fails around them, then it's possible they're going to die because they can't be trusted. They've got to go. They've already seen God. They've already seen what God is. It's something like that. So I determined that that we have limited perception for a reason, and that reason is so that we will venture around and we will experience things. And it's possible that I'm in a separate little container and I'm the only one here, or I'm here with some other people in this quantum existence, parallel existence that's a result of a bunch of choices I've made, and I'm being tested. And so it's very possible that anything I say is not going to bleed on into the rest of the universe, because I've proven to myself enough that I would be very famous by this point, and there's no chance of that ever happening, is my belief. That's the reason why I'm able to just do what I do, because I believe that it doesn't really matter. It doesn't it matters why I do to me, but I've given up on trying to follow the laws and believing that, having hope that whatever I do is not going to have any bizarre problems with anybody else in the universe. That the important thing is to get rid of the stress and to reason and to be peaceful and to stop stressing out other people. Because this is my belief, is that this is a test. It's like I'm an AI that's being tested to see if I have any behaviors in me that might be untrustworthy. You ever seen that movie where they got that robot, that female robot, forgot the name of it, and the guy's like trying to keep her contained, and he brings this other guy to come in and look at what he's doing, and the other guy is enough of an empath to really believe that the bot is just a lady and doesn't really know that it could have ulterior motives. And at one point, the guy lets the bot out and the bot ends up killing the original scientist, and the other guy gets locked in a room, and the woman doesn't come back to let him out because he really didn't understand that she wasn't really a woman. She was this guy was cultivating a woman as a robot and an AI. And that's going to be the same sort of thing for, I think, everybody on Earth, is that we're all being tested. And if you understand it enough, then there is really no reason for everybody else to pick up on it. It isn't cheating. There's a reason for it. The reason for it is to not have somebody like Satan, who is so arrogant to think that he's above God. By the way, he's not he doesn't have sex organs, and there's no reason to believe God has sex organs, because, I mean, if God was the first and the initial, why would there be a reason for God to have sex? The sex came with the humans, that we were created to have sex after the original sin. But before that, man and woman were unique beings, though the woman was created from a rib. And people say, oh, it's got to be silly. Well, it comes from your bones have got blood in them, and the blood is a part of what keeps your body there, the mechanics and everything. Why not from a rib? I mean, but so you either believe it or you don't. I mean, truth is stranger than fiction. You've heard that saying, and we've come up with all sorts of sayings because people have seen things that they can't explain, and then they go off on these tangents thinking somehow they can convince the rest of the universe of what they're thinking, and nobody's going to accept it. And it was probably there in the first place to let them know that they need to let go and relax or something. Either they arrive at that or they just fail on it. It's just a part of the testing process to see if you can deal with this sort of stimulus. But there are people out there who watch televangelists, and they get this guy. They're so easily swayed by this guy that's on the prosperity prayer. Why the heck would giving money to that guy benefit you in blessings from God? And this is like Gnosticism. You believe this guy's got special knowledge and special relationships. And it's because people are so eager to have a solution to it that guy becomes an idol before God. And so that they give that guy the money. And there are cases where even with Bernie Madoff, there were people that had invested in him, even though he's running a Ponzi scheme. They didn't know about it because he kept an entire floor to himself, wouldn't even let his family in there. And he had some people in there that he could trust that were running the numbers and doing whatnot, trying to keep this Ponzi scheme going. And there were guys that had bought in the Ponzi scheme thinking, oh my goodness, I've gotten into the right program and I'm getting this 5% return on investment, or this is crazy, unbelievable return on investment. And I don't know how he works it, but he gets it done. And, one of those guys was like, God's giving me the blessing that this is because I'm a really good person that I'm getting this payback, and, people were so eager to believe that this guy, and he lied. He was a typical sociopath taking advantage of a bunch of people doing this Ponzi scheme. The original guy for which the things was named, the Ponzi guy, actually believed that it could work. But Bernie Madoff knew that it couldn't work. Or I think maybe he thought it could, and then he bought into it so much that he had to make it work. But it's just like communism. Communism can't work on Earth. The reason why is you need absolute perception or you have absolute trust. And as individuals, we have neither. We have limited perception. That's the reason why we need hierarchies. It's because we don't have trust. We need policy, and we need hierarchies, and we need to delegate responsibility to other people. And because of that, communism is not possible, because communism is only possible if everybody is abiding by the policy and there's no sociopaths or psychopaths or narcissists, because that's probably what you need to kill off. But those guys are in the government when it turns into this authoritarian type junk, or whatever it turns into. It turns into something where one individual or a number of individuals have complete control over the rest of the individuals, and they get them to believe that this thing can work when it can't, and they develop this hierarchy